spent a number of years looking at how technology can be used to support all aspects of assessing learning. We've published guidance on a range of assessment-related themes, and you'll find links to all of the online resources at the end of these slides. One thing our research showed was that UK universities seem to be making less use of technology for final exams than for other aspects of assessment. People kept telling us that they expected online exams to be the next big thing, but they didn't have very much experience of them at present. This was in contrast to the situation in our colleges of further education, where online testing is much more common. So to find out more about the latest developments with technology in universities, we looked to our colleagues in the EUNIS community and found that the Netherlands and Norway in particular had a lot of experience and were very willing to share with us. So it's that partnership and that sharing of experience that we'll be discussing today. We're going to hear from Stuart Allen from Scotland, who researched the topic of online exams for his master's degree. We'll hear from David Parmentier from Norway and Annette Piet from the Netherlands, who helped Stuart with his research. And we'll be hearing from Martin Rhodes, who has a lot of experience in online testing in the further education sector. The way the webinars work is that we'll hear from each speaker in turn. We'll have time for 1 or 2 questions after each section, and then we'll have a more general discussion and question and answer session at the end. So if you have a specific question for one of the speakers, then please type it in the chat box, preface it with a capital Q for questions so that we can pick it up easily, and we'll pick them up as quickly as we can. If your question is a general one, then please save it until the end. I'm delighted that we have registered participants from at least 20 different countries, so it would be nice just to get a feel for your experience. So I'd like to invite you to tell us to what extent your college or university is already using online exams. You can make your selection by clicking the polling button, which is the right-hand icon directly above the list of participants. I can see some people are typing it in the box, but if you could just click that little icon and then make your choice there, that will get them all registered. Some of you are probably putting your hand up instead. Yeah, looks like getting quite a lot of answers coming in. Still some answers coming in. Okay, I think most people have answered now, so Lisa, maybe if you could show us the results on screen. Quite a lot of people seem to be making regular use. That's very interesting. Possibly reflects the spread of people that we've got. That it is a mixture of colleges and universities. So there aren't many people who haven't tried it at all. That's interesting, and obviously you're here because you find the topic of interest and of importance. So just another quick question. Why do you think this is important and interesting? Why are you doing it at the moment? So again, if you could use that button to respond to the poll. If there's any other reasons you're using it, why that we haven't selected, then maybe you could type that into the chat box. yes, I think in answer to your question, we are taught pedagogy includes anything to do with better designing the curriculum. Yeah, John, preparing for employment in industry. Yeah, I guess maybe B covers that as well. Okay, Lisa, would you like to let us see what the results are there? All of the above. They're all good reasons. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to return to this at the end and see whether any of the discussions that we have today have changed your views at all on the topic. But for now, I would just like to hand over to Stuart Allen, who will give you an overview of the outcomes of his research.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Jill, and thanks to you and Lisa and everybody else who's taking part in this webinar today. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes about the findings that I got about online exams as part of as my dissertation project for the MSc in Digital Education at Edinburgh University, which I've recently completed. I'm going to actually turn my webcam off just in case I have any bandwidth problems. And I'll hopefully pick up any questions in the chat at the end. And there's also, if I can just put up the first slide, there's a link on the first slide to my blog where you can find the abstract for the dissertation that I've recently submitted. And I work for Edinburgh Business School, which is part of Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. So as I think Jill and Lisa said already, there seems to be quite a high level of interest in online exams, but not that many case studies about their use, specifically in terms of educational practice. And what I mean by that is practice that focuses purely on the achievement of educational goals, however they're defined, either by the institution or by the student. And what I found was, when I was researching the literature for my dissertation, that there was a lot of published articles about cheating in online exams, security concerns, technological concerns, and not that much to do with the achievement of educational goals or learning. And what I was trying to do in my research was to try and fill that gap slightly. So I did find some good case studies in my literature search as well, and the finished one that I've put on the slide there is a good place to start if anybody wants to read some more, and I have got the references in a slide at the end of this talk for anybody who's interested in reading more. So the two key concepts that I'm talking about here and that structured the research that I did are these two. So it's migration and transformation, and these are terms that I find myself coming across a lot in the reports that I read. And I actually ended up finding a paper, this one by Ripley, 2009, that used exactly the same terms to talk about computer-based testing, and I'm applying these to online exams in higher education, and specifically summative online exams, so high stakes at the end of the programme. So the main difference between these two terms for me is how the purposes of the online exam is understood within a particular context. So the migration view sees digital technologies in online exams as an instrument that can be used to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the exam process. Whereas transformation, on the other hand, looks at the digital technology as more of a catalyst for change, and often this is framed in terms of realigning an, in inverted commas, outdated educational system with the perceived needs of contemporary students. And I started out on this research process thinking that transformation was the better way to go, but what I found out is that both of these approaches actually had significant shortcomings. And if I want people to come away with one thing from my slides anyway, it's that point that both of these views of online exams have their problems. So the research I did was semi-structured interviews with technical and academic staff who were directly involved in online exams. So those people were in the UK, Norway, Ireland and the Netherlands, and it was a qualitative coding and analysis informed by grounded theory. So I'm going to talk about three main findings that I had: migration, transformation and context. And I'm going to just talk through some excerpts from the interviews. I'm going to talk around them. They're quite long, so I'm not going to read them out, but you feel free to read through them as I'm talking. So the first finding that I wanted to talk about under the heading of migration was what this quotation I think shows, which is an expectation amongst a few people that I spoke to that technology should be neutral, it should be sustaining in online exams, and in a way kind of subordinate to the human intentions that we have as practitioners. As Martin says, it's the online exam technology itself should be not thought about or in the background. And what I think I found was that there was some examples of the reality being quite a bit messier than that. So in some cases the technologies are actually entangled with the educational practices. They're not separate, they're not subordinate all the time, and the technologies themselves actually have important implications for educational practice. So that's, I think, an important point to make about the view where we migrate exams across for efficiency purposes or for other purposes that I'm defining as migration. And I think the next slide gives an example of this too. So the reason I've selected this quote is that I think it shows how the relationships between the pre-existing assumptions about exams and the technologies that are in use to support the online exams can be a problem. So in Anna's case, she found that a specific technology and its relationship with a specific set of expectations in her particular context was a problem. So the expectations were that the types of questions that would be asked and the compliance with the standard security conditions that have been applied to all exams, online or non-online, since your daughter at her institution. So, so what I think this says is that the people who implement online exams have to resolve quite difficult problems or dilemmas when they're implementing these technologies and trying to use them in practice, which can lead to them making a lot of compromises or in some cases even abandoning their experiment with online exams altogether. So in Anna's case, she thought it was too resource intensive to offer an online exam because she thought that required a one-to-one ratio between invigilators and students. And another point I would make here is that some of the individuals I was speaking to were saying that they thought they would migrate their online exams first, so they would take the exam in its current state and migrate it into an online technology without altering it at all, and that was the logical first step into maybe a deeper questioning of what the purposes of online exams were. And one of the findings that I had was that in some cases that first step, that migration into online technology, that first step to an online exam can sometimes be so complex and so expensive and so labour intensive that they might never get beyond that that stage into some more questioning of, well, what do we actually want to do with exams in the future? And that first process is very complicated, I think. So if we go on to transformation, there was examples of what I'm saying are kind of essentialist claims about technology, that by using technology in and of itself, it's making exam questions better. And in Maria's case, she was saying that the online questions were better because they were accumulating data. Now, the analysis of exam data might well improve exam questions, but what I'm saying is that the analysis of that data is not objective, and the Cormac O'Keefe paper and the references at the end makes a good point about how the data is often framed and analysed in administrative terms rather than educational terms. So I think it's a question of why are we gathering data and what are we trying to do with it and what's it got to do with education. And there's often essentialist claims made about the power of technology to change education, such as this one here by Stephen Ball. And this was a theme that I was coming across in my research as well, that there's a perception that education has to change to meet society's changing needs, and that goes across lots of aspects of education, but that seems to be an argument that's made about online exams as well. And I suppose I'm asking the question, is that is that a good place to start thinking about online exams? And I think David might talk a little about the student perceptions of technology and online exams in his particular context. Another thing I found was this possible mismatch between how students perceived online exams and the reality in terms of their exam scores. So sometimes students think an online exam is easier than a traditional exam, but that might not always be borne out by the performance in terms of their grade. So the question I'm asking here, I suppose, is maybe we shouldn't be thinking about how we make online exams equivalent to traditional exams and try and maintain those direct lines of equivalence with previous systems. But we think about how online exams might actually be qualitatively different in terms of the skills that they assess. That might be something that we need to think about, and how the intellectual demands of an online exam are perceived by students. The third main heading in the findings that I had was about context. So I'd really recommend the work of Shan Bain, who takes a critical posthumanist position on digital education, and that helped me to think about online exams. And so it's this point about in which context and for whom might enhancement be desirable and feasible. If we think about online exams as a form of enhancement, where's that desirable and where's that feasible? And just trying to get at the detail of that a little bit more. So again, sorry, there's quite a lot of reading on these slides, but what these two quotations are showing, I think, is that they were talking about exactly the same subject. These were two interviewees, different institutions. I talked to them separately, and they talked about the same subject, anatomy and physiology, in polar opposite terms. One said that it was quite suitable for an online exam, and one said it should definitely remain in a traditional examination format. So again, I'm not saying either of these arguments is incorrect, but what I'm saying is that what's important is how the online exams were understood within those specific contexts, so how the purposes of an exam are defined within a specific context. So in Lucas's case, the main issue was making the exams academically defensible, and for Anna, it was more of a pragmatic concern about which question types could be converted to an online format, which seemed to assume that multiple choice questions were almost synonymous with online exams. So my point here is that maybe instead of looking for specific disciplines that will or won't lend themselves to online exams, again, we need to think about what the purposes of the exams actually are within a specific context. And this quote from Kim is here really just to show the point about where online exams might be feasible. So I found quite a lot of variation between the people I spoke to about the support they were receiving within their institution to experiment with online exams. And that's the point I'll come back to when I'm rounding up. So in terms of the opportunities and challenges within online exams, I think the opportunity might be there to create a different type of summative assessment that maybe asks different types of questions, and that there might be an opportunity for people to think about, well, why are we doing exams in the first place? Do we need to think about other forms of assessment as well as or instead of exams? But also, can we do different things with online exams that maybe assess different types of capabilities compared to traditional exams? So, and we also know that summative assessment determines a lot of student activities and effort. I mean, we've all heard students say, will this be on the exam, before they decide if something's worth looking at or not. So I think there's an opportunity there in terms of this might be one of the main ways that educational institutions can engage students more effectively and increase retention through the summative assessment activities, because they seem to be so important to students. But the challenges shouldn't be underestimated. Again, I would say that migration online is a first step. If we think of migration online as a first step towards other changes in the future, that's sometimes, I'd say, at best optimistic, and at worst possibly a red herring. And so rather than diving headlong into migration projects, we need to ask questions about exactly what an exam system is trying to achieve. And we can't ignore questions about equivalence between old and new systems, but we need to find out, we need to find answers to questions about security concerns and about equivalence with old systems. And you guessed it, the answer might well be more research. So I know I'm nearly out of time here, so this is my last slide. So what's needed? Jill and Lisa asked me to think about how Jisc and EUNIS might be able to help and support institutions who are considering using online exams. So for me, the main theme is thought leadership. How do we take exam systems back to first principles and ask ourselves, what exactly are we trying to achieve? What might the exams of the future look like? So computer-based exam centres or online proctoring might be a part of that, but what else could we do? You know, we need to have more bold visions of, other visions of what could be possible in the future. And I know that Annette is going to go on and talk about context and educational vision and her 5-step model for online assessment, which is great to see. And I do wonder how often these steps are missed out at some institutions, thinking about context, thinking about vision. And also, decision makers within universities seem to need more case studies to help them make decisions and help them understand how online exams might be different from traditional exams and how they can support experiments, people who are experimenting with online exams within their institution. And just the last point I'd make is that the material realities of online exams seem to be really important, so institutions might need more help to understand the specifically educational implications of either buying an off-the-shelf piece of exam software or developing their own. And these are the references that I've worked through. And this is me. And I realise that was a bit of a rattle through, but hopefully that was useful.
Thank you very much, Stuart. You've given us a lot to think about already. If anybody has any quick specific questions for Stuart, please type them in the chat box. I can see one or two general questions that we'll come back to at the end. And somebody did ask a question, Stuart. When we're talking about online exams here, do we really mean online in the sense that you have to be connected to the internet all the way through the exam, or are we just talking about something that's in digital format?
That's a good question, and I was deliberately quite broad in the way that I handled online exams. So it could be both. It could be the people I was talking to were dealing with exams that required an online connection the whole time, the whole way through the exam, but there was others that were doing what you might define as more computer-based testing. And there's some examples in the literature of online exams that are, might have a 48-hour window for people to complete their answers. So they might be coming in and out of an internet connection the whole time. I was deliberately quite broad, I think, because the field is quite small in terms of practice at the moment.
Thanks. There's another question about costs. I think we might cover that later. If anyone has any experience about costing analog versus digital, you can type it in the chat and we'll come back and talk about that more at the end. Right now I'm going to hand straight on to David from Norway.
Good dag alle sammen. And for those of you who don't speak Norwegian, good day to you all. It's a great pleasure for me also to be here. Lovely to see or get a little bit of a feel for Stuart's work. Nice to see Jill again. I met her first a year ago at a conference on digital assessment here in Norway. As some of you perhaps can hear by my accent, I'm in fact not a native Norwegian, but have been born and raised in the USA. I have lived and worked in Norway and worked in higher education for the last 20+ years, focusing nearly the entire time work on teaching technology, and the last 5 years or so have been working with digital assessment. Norway is an interesting country. It's quite large and quite sparsely populated. So it works really well both in terms of online education but also online assessment, and it's something that's important to the country. Traditionally, Norway and higher education has been quite conservative. The pen and paper written summative final examination has been the form of choice. Norway also has a very big public sector in terms of higher education. Private sector higher education is much smaller. In 2003, we had what was known as a quality reform. It sounds good, and in fact, in terms of assessment, it was relatively good. We were encouraged to provide more varied assessment types. To our good old 3-copied written pen and paper written assignment. We were encouraged to have more frequent assessments, both formative and summative. And we were encouraged to use feedback as a process throughout the course, rather than simply giving feedback at the end of a course, as we had been doing with this pen and paper summative final exam. In 2011, we had a big student movement based on students who'd been in upper secondary school, taking exams via computers for years, and then coming to higher education and going back to pen and paper. So in 2011, the students began to rattle their sabers and demanding, we want digital exams at the university level as well. They were able to scare management quite effectively, who quickly jumped into action. An organization somewhat similar to Jisc in Norway then started coordinating national activity focusing on digital assessment in general. On the local level, my university college, which is Sogn og Fjordane University College, which will remain so for about 3 months until we join forces with a couple of other university colleges to become the University College of Western Norway, quadrupling our student enrollment. But our university college reacted similarly. We said, what can we do to respond to this student outcry? Our first response was to set up, investing quite a few hundreds of thousands of crowns, a permanent exam lab with university equipment, stationary computers put into a room separated by nice walls so the students couldn't see each other's screens, making sure we had appropriate ventilation for all these, both students and computers, appropriate internet connections, good enough electricity. And the students effectively then had replaced pen and paper exams with a keyboard. They could log into a text editor, work editing text, responding to questions. They could save their work, and at the end they printed it out. Nothing elegant at all, certainly nothing cheap. I saw a number of questions in the chat about the price. The imperative here wasn't that it should be cheap, but that we should provide the students with something that they were demanding as a response to that. In 2014, we then bought licenses to a Danish digital examination system called WiseFlow, based on the lockdown web browser technology. And the bring your own device style of thinking, where students would bring their laptops, their Macintosh, PC, Linux, what have you, download a little file, which was the lockdown web browser file, and when examen day and period came, they could log into this, again being completely locked into a text editor, no access to the internet, where they could work on their answers, work on their responses, regular saving, not have to think about that, to a server in Denmark, and at the end the files then are automatically delivered to the proctors. Fairly effective system. And you can see by our numbers that we started fairly modestly and have been growing relatively quickly. Our focus has been nearly exclusively on replacing pen and paper exams with digital exams, migration all the way. So for the semester 2016, you can see that we're now 16 spring, we're up to roughly 20% of all of our student exams are happening through this examination system. And I expect that, the numbers will continue to grow fairly rapidly. So what's the institutional perspective then? Great, we want more. Summative, final exams, replace, get rid of the pen and paper, let's do this in a large way. There's a slight focus on more innovative examination forms. My office provides funding for digital projects focusing on teaching and learning. Each year we give out small amounts of money for to buy our faculty time to work on development. In the last 2 years we've focused specifically on innovative exam forms other than the simple and direct replacement of pen and paper exams. Norway also has a state organization that offers much more funding for similar things, but in terms of innovative use of digital exams. I'm working on an application now, and it says clearly, if you're simply wanting to replace pen and paper exams with computer, with keyboard, don't bother. We're not interested. So there is a bit of a focus in Norway as well as from my institution on innovation. Okay, the student perspective, quite similar to the institutional perspective, with a notable difference, and that is the focus on innovative examinations. The students, from my perspective, and I'm not a world expert, but in the last 5 years I don't think I've heard once students asking for innovation in terms of exam forms. They're asking for access to the technology. A little bit interesting. Some of our students still prefer the traditional pen and paper exams, the stability, the computer crash, the network going down. They don't like the idea of a program taking over their computer. Some say they think more clearly when writing by hand, which in light of fairly recent research is an interesting and relevant point with the differences in learning with handwriting and keyboard writing, something we really ought to take with us in our thinking forward with regards to digital examination in general. So in general, our institution, and perhaps Norway, is looking something like this. My perspective, the migration is great. Our students are quite satisfied. Our proctors don't have to struggle through the difficult handwriting of our students. Our management loves to look at these numbers and watch the curves going up. Finally, the notion of transformatory change in higher education is something that comes quite slowly. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions. I have 36 seconds left on my timer.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Does anyone have any specific questions for David that they would like to type into the chat box? I noticed that there's been a chat around the systems you're talking about and people sharing some information about systems. Are there any follow-up questions before we move on? No, I think that's generated a lot of interest, the fact that you're actually responding to student demand. And somebody just asked, could you say a little bit more about, you said you were 95% migration, 5% transformation. Is there anything more you could say about the attempts that you're making towards transformation?
Quickly, we have worked a little bit with online oral exams. We've worked a little bit with case studies and students working together on cases where the questions are so complex that even though you have access to internet, you can't get the right answer. You have to apply the knowledge as opposed to answering the correct response. So it's in that direction that we're working when we're looking at other than strictly migratory activity.
Thanks. And somebody just asking where you have gone for online exams. Do students get the choice or is it compulsory?
No, currently we give students the choice to go online or otherwise, and as a result we have a mix. Surprisingly enough, with some courses there are 90% of the students who choose to write with pen and paper, and other courses 100% you go online. So our results there in terms of who chooses what vary quite significantly.
Sure, that sounds like another interesting MSc project for somebody to research that. Thanks very much. We'll come back to you at the end, but I'd now like to move on and introduce Annette Piet from SFUC in the Netherlands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to tell you something about the Dutch situation. I'm working at SURFnet to be more precise, which is an organization which is quite similar to Jisc. And we do a lot on innovation in education and a lot on knowledge exchange and starting projects and experimenting with institutions. In the last 6 to 7 years, we've had a lot of experience with digital assessment, and I would like to share with you some insights from the Dutch situation, and I'm hoping it can be of interest for other countries as well. In the Netherlands, we see that digital assessment is becoming more and more on top of the agenda of many institutions in higher education. And institutions have different reasons to start with digital assessment. But when we look at the early adapters from 2009 and later, we see that it's mainly large research institutions like Delft University who felt a strong urge to reduce workload for teachers. They chose, so to speak, for the concept of migration. And most institution-wide initiatives in the last 5 years started from this point of view. Universities, they invested a lot in large-scale testing facility and making digital exams possible. So it was an efficiency-driven approach, and this is still the most dominant nowadays in the Netherlands. But also in the last couple of years, I think also because we've started some initiatives together with SURF, we see that institutions have an increasing demand for a flexible and personalized education, and institutions start to think more about the pedagogical possibilities of digital assessment. So that's something that we can see coming up at the moment. I first want to look into the large-scale testing facilities in the Netherlands, because that's something that a lot of Dutch universities have invested in the last couple of years, and we see different solutions for large-scale testing. Just for your information, in the Netherlands, every university has the freedom to choose their own policies. So it's not government-driven or anything. They just get a large sum of money and they decide what to do with their education for themselves. So every university is quite unique, also in the way they choose to which solution they choose for digital assessment. In the Netherlands, for example, we see a lot of institutions who chose for flexible tables where the screen can be stocked in the table, so the room can be suitable for written exams as well. And sometimes we see fixed settings, and there's quite an interesting new setting has come up with Utrecht University last year, where they use Chromebooks, where hundreds of Chromebooks can be installed within half an hour, and it works completely online. Wireless, and it costs far less than large testing rooms with flexible or fixed settings. So it's just a couple of €100 per Chromebook, where a fixed or flexible table can cost for about €1,500, just an example. But we also see that a lot of institutions are wondering if they should invest large sums of money in large-scale testing facilities, because those large testing facilities cost millions of euros, and they're wondering, aren't there ways to make use of the student laptops? And at this moment there are some pilots going on with bring your own device in the Netherlands with bootable USB sticks to take over the laptop of the student. And there are also some pilots running with online proctoring. And also because of the growing interest in the possibilities of online proctoring, we've written a white paper on this topic, and this provides relevant information on security and privacy issues. So if you're interested, Lisa and Jill can provide the link to this white paper. Well, one of the key issues we see in the Netherlands, and I think that Stuart has also mentioned it, is safety. Cheating isn't allowed, of course, and cheating means reputational damage for institutions. And many decision makers in institutions, they dread safety issues in the Netherlands because, so in this way, safety issues can become a stumbling block for implementation of digital assessment. And that's why we help institutions to create a safe testing environment. And for example, we've developed this model, and it invites you to look at assessment safety in a more nuanced way. And it helps you to decide whether or not you could choose for a relatively unsafe way of examining, like bring your own device or online proctoring. And you don't need, in every case, you don't need a controlled regular exam hall. It totally depends on the risk for fraud and the importance of the exam, whether it's a high-stake or a low-stake exam. So we don't always have to focus on 100% fraud-proof assessment, and this insight certainly opens doors for institutions and for digital assessment as well. And as I said, well, safety is really an important issue, and that's also why we decided to help universities to improve the safety. And we've also concluded that it's not just the test-taking phase which consists with safety issues, but it's also in other phases of the whole assessment life cycle. And together with security officers and assessment experts of 5 institutions, we've created a workbook for safe testing. It consists of checklists to analyze the safety of the processes along the assessment life cycle. It's not available in English yet, but if we feel there's a need, so please let me know, then I can find some funding maybe for translation. We're really happy to do that. Well, luckily, on the other hand, we see that when institutions become more familiar with digital assessment, they also have a growing interest in assessment for learning. We see that also because, well, the society is changing. Institutions are facing the growing need for lifelong learning. They see things like MOOCs, which raise questions about how to organize education and flexibility in programs. And on the other hand, we also see there's a growing awareness of the pedagogical possibilities to enhance education by redefining the role of assessment. So for using it in a formative way or using other question types, assessing complex skills. And I would like to mention Kees van der Vleuten, you see in the slide. He's a Dutch professor who has developed a nice approach to adopt assessment as an integral part of the learning process. It's called programmatic assessment. So please Google it. It's very interesting, and it's already been used, his approach, in Utrecht University. And also at SURF, we hope to inspire institutions to adopt new forms of assessment and to focus on assessment for learning instead of assessment of learning. And that's why we've published a thematic issue on innovations in digital assessment. And in this issue, we interviewed several experts on how they see that assessment can change the learning process. The experts emphasize the importance to use data from formative tests that enable direct feedback to be provided to the students, and enabling tests and courses to be adapted to different student levels. This issue also focuses on good practices of innovative assessment, and it's also available in English, and I can provide the link via Lisa or Jill. And then my last slide. Well, what we see in the Netherlands is that many institutions started with migration, or as I call it, the efficiency approach. And along the way, they discover new insights and possibilities. They realize that there's a lack of expertise and not enough support. They face procurement issues, safety issues, organizational issues. And we also see institutions that linger in small-scale solutions and miss an overall view. So to help institutions to make the transformation towards a sustainable innovation of assessment, we developed a 5-step model together with institutions. It helps them to think ahead, to look before you leap, and prevent them from making mistakes that others have already made before them. So the model is a way to help the implementation of digital assessment. And I can't go into depth now because I'm almost out of my time, but I think if you think it would be useful for other countries, please let me know and we can have a translation. So, and that were my 10 minutes, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette. That's fantastic. I can see already from the chat that there's a lot of interest in this translation, a lot of people asking for it. Some excellent resources there from the Netherlands, and you've got links to them all in the chat pane. Does anybody have any specific questions for Annette? I just wondered if you were able to say anything about the cost aspect. You certainly thought that you gave some specific figures of 200 euros as opposed to 1,500 euros in Chromebook. Have you done any analysis on the difference between traditional paper exams and the cost of digital over a longer time?
Yes, you know, well, there are some figures about it. What makes it difficult is that if you look at the cost for digital exams, then there's a lot of costs that you need to make for the building of the item banks, for instance. That's really a costly and time-consuming process. And at the Netherlands or at SURF, we think that institutions should be working together and doing this in an efficient way. It wouldn't have to cost so much money. But the problem is, if you look at an item bank and you're going to build an item bank, then you're going to figure out how much hours this will cost, how much money this will cost. And on the other hand, if you're looking at the work of the traditional professor or a teacher at the university at this moment, they're just doing all kinds of things for themselves, and they don't tend to keep up, they don't make note of how much time they spend on their preparation of exams. So the cost they're making now, at this moment or in the traditional way, we don't have much insight on how many hours they're spending, and they're not willing to keep the hours, or how do you call it, to make note of how many hours they're spending. So if you're talking about digital assessment, then you make visible what the costs are, and on the other hand, it's not so visible what the traditional costs are. So that's what makes it difficult to show whether or not digital assessment is expensive or not. I hope I can make myself clear.
Thank you. There's another question from Sheila about people's experiences of how long it takes from doing a trial to actually go to wide-scale adoption. I imagine that more than one person might have answers, so I'm just going to invite you to type those answers into the chat, and we'll come back to it if there's time at the end. Meanwhile, we'll move on to Martin, please.
Hi, good afternoon, or good morning, everybody. I'd like to talk a little bit about the experience in the non-degree, sub-degree sector in the UK. Colleges and training providers providing programs to 16 to 19 and lifelong learning, and the summative aspect of some of those programs and qualifications. It should just be added that there's a lot of formative activity going on in these organisations as well. And there's a lot of the qualifications that also undertake continuous assessment using portfolios and e-portfolios. But I'm concentrating here primarily on e-assessment in the summative testing. So the context is rather different from the ones we've been hearing of so far. The qualifications are all defined and administered by something like 100 awarding organisations, which I think is quite a unique set up to England in particular. And the sector is regulated by government through an organisation called Ofqual, who are a regulator in the sense of the word that they regulate those 100 and more awarding organisations. And as a consequence, colleges and training providers have very little say in the assessment model that's going to be used for those qualifications, or indeed the design of those qualifications and those assessments. And as a consequence, it's the awarding organisation that selects and administers the delivery system that colleges and training providers are going to use for their online tests. Where we are now, we have significant numbers of on-screen tests being taken every year, measured in the hundreds of thousands. And that's been the situation now for getting on for 15 years. A quick build-up in the early days, in the early 2000s, primarily because of a catalyst through a program of basic and key skills qualifications that were introduced in the UK in 2000-2001, and some encouragement immediately after that these qualifications were taken on screen. The on-screen testing is primarily limited or undertaken in the vocational knowledge-based subjects. There's been little development in academic subjects for all sorts of reasons, which I'll try and come back to towards the end. Whilst there's been quite a bit of innovation, most are still multiple choice question based, perhaps innovative multiple choice questions, but nevertheless MCQs. And a lot of the testing is available on demand. In other words, it can be undertaken by learners on demand with a short period of notice that they're ready to take a test. Almost all are undertaking in invigilated or proctored exam conditions. There's very little online proctoring taking place, and indeed there's some concern that online proctoring wouldn't meet the necessary regulations. So all of them are undertaken, most of them are undertaken in invigilated exam conditions. Most colleges and training providers have adopted online testing to a greater or lesser extent. And surveys tend to suggest that most students prefer on-screen testing, although there are always some who would suggest that they prefer traditional paper and pencil tests. But the vast majority prefer to use their do their testing on screen. There's particular reasons for that, but one of them is that students and teachers like the immediate results that they can be obtained from on-screen testing, and the possibility of getting detailed feedback, again, almost immediately if that's a part of the program that they're undertaking. And there's some evidence, again, that student achievement improves from doing tests online. Now, that's interesting when compared with one of the comments that was being made earlier on. And there needs probably, I suspect, some work to be done in the UK to dig down as to why that's the feeling in terms of student achievement. One of the issues, however, and one of the reasons that innovation has been slow to be adopted in many cases, is that there are concerns raised from across the board about comparability between paper and on-screen testing. Most of these tests have to be made available on paper as well, and colleges and training providers and indeed individual students can sometimes choose which mode they use for their tests, and therefore they need to be comparable tests when they are being looked at. Some of the challenges. There's a general public feeling, an overall feeling that using technology is a dumbing down of exams. If I, when I was at school many years ago, had to do it in a hall full of people writing madly, then that should be the case for current students as well. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the UK, certainly, to challenge that view that dumbing down is as a result of using technology. There are still indeed some staff who are uncertain about the value of on-screen testing, and may perhaps themselves be concerned that it's not the best way of moving forward. And there is still some concern about the digital literacy of staff and students and their ability to manage and contribute to on-screen testing. In addition to that, there's challenges around the design. We were talking earlier on about migration versus transformation, and many of the tests are indeed simply transfers from paper to screen. Few qualifications or assessment instruments are designed with technology as a delivery mechanism, and as we're starting with the view that we're using technology and therefore we can use the advantages that perhaps technology has to improve the quality of the assessment instrument. And so little opportunities made of design opportunities presented by technology, and therefore on occasions little incentive to innovate. The opportunities include also the development of assessment that is more fit for purpose, using some of those innovative possibilities presented by using technology. Widening the use of the assessment into more academic subjects is a perennial issue that's raised in the UK, and whilst there is some movement in that direction, it is not one that is really gathering steam and moving forward to the extent it should be. And in the vocational area, thinking about aligning assessment design with the needs of the employability curriculum, where students who are doing vocational programs should really be using the kinds of technology they're going to find when they take up employment. So we need to ensure that the technology is at the core of new curriculum and assessment design. We need to be using technology to offer a more flexible assessment model matched to students' needs. We talked a little bit about efficiency gains. And at the end of the day, we need to improve the perception of using technology by demonstrating its value to assessment practice across the board, for students, for the general public, for teachers and so on. Really in the second decade of the 21st century, it should, unless there are good reasons otherwise, it should be the norm, as it is in most other sectors of business and so on. Other thoughts. Somebody's mentioned, and we saw a picture in one of the earlier presentations about the use of laptops in exams. It's not widespread, but it's being increasingly requested. There's certainly one UK awarding organisation that is responding by allowing their exams to be undertaken on laptops, or including bring your own devices, because there are so many requests for it to be available. I've talked a little bit about remote proctoring and invigilation, which is unlikely under current regulations, but could provide significant flexibility in the future if some of the safety and security issues were able to be addressed. And lastly, just to throw into the mix, nobody's talked yet about the use of gaming theory. which I think personally is an interesting avenue for exploration. But of course, there are significant costs attached because the development of tests or assessments that use such theory would be quite expensive. Okay, I think I've just made it before the bell. Again, any questions would be helpful.
If you have any questions for Martin, please start typing them in the chat now. One thing, Martin, I don't know whether Martin or Stuart might have a view on this, but you seem to have different evidence in that Stuart said students seem to score worse in online exams, whereas Martin, you said student achievement improved. Are there any particular reasons you can think of for this?
Perhaps if I could come in first, and this is only my own perception, and that is we're talking here in most cases about sub-degree programs, and in some cases about quite low level in the UK terms 1 and 2 qualifications. And I'm wondering whether students at those levels who perhaps find it quite a challenge to answer a question with a sentence and so on, find it more straightforward, particularly when faced with a multiple choice question of some kind, to think through and make a decision about which way they want to answer, rather than having to think through how they're going to answer it in terms of composing an answer. That is purely my own view, and I've got nothing particularly in terms of research to back up that particular view.
I can certainly see a logic to that. Stuart, do you have any idea why you think HE level students might find online exams more difficult?
Well, I mean, in the example that I presented there, that was in one specific program which was for radiographers, and what they were doing was the online exams was allowing them to look at 3D volumetric scans rather than paper-based scans, and what they were doing was they were thinking for some reason that because it was computer-based it was more straightforward, but what was actually coming across was that they were underestimating just how complex or how much more complex the task was when they were looking at 3D images on screen. So I suppose the point I was making there is that is there other contexts where online exams there's an increased complexity that the students might actually underestimate, you know, if they're dealing with richer sources of media in a case study, for example.
That's great. That example perhaps also suggests, though, that the online version is more authentic. I can see a question for Martin in the chat. Somebody's asked, would you just say a little bit more about what you're saying about gaming theory perhaps offering some opportunities?
Yes, I mean, the reason I raised that, and I'm kind of throwing that in the end as a bit of a kind of a challenge and debate, is there was a program in the UK which is getting on for 10 years ago now in schools at Key Stage 3 where some quite sophisticated tests for ICT were developed, and they made use to some extent of what I would call adaptive activity within the actual test. So as the pupil went through the test and answered in certain ways and went in certain directions, so what they would be presented with was changed to react, if you like, to their responses so far. It was a very expensive project, and that was probably partly because we are talking about 10 years ago, and things have moved on in technology terms since then. But the actual theory and experience behind the project and the assessments were extremely innovative and very interesting in terms of using technology to actually take students through a case study, through a process of which every stage of what they were doing was able to be assessed and I use the term scored in inverted commas in a very innovative way. And I'm wondering whether there are opportunities, not as costly, to pick up on some of that and use it for assessment.
Thank you. I think we are just about over time, but I'm sure the presenters are happy to stay a little longer, take some more questions, join in some more discussion. For those of you who can hang on, I would just like to invite you just to say a little bit about how has this discussion influenced your views on online or digital testing in any way. We have options A to D, so if you'd like to just click a polling button and tell us what you're thinking. See the numbers clicking up, but maybe a few people yet to vote. Can we maybe see the results on screen, please, Lisa? Oh, so very, very interestingly, very encouragingly, having seen some of the good practice and heard some more case studies, people are a little bit more positive about, yeah, somebody said in the chat, a better view about what could actually be possible. Next question, if we are going to make progress with this and capitalise on the opportunities, what do you see as the main barriers? So again, if you would like to choose one of the options and click the polling button. Few people saying all of those answers. Yep, so interestingly, perhaps not entirely surprisingly, culture is, and simply what we're used to and the way we're used to doing things might actually be the biggest issue for very many of us. Okay, seeing that there is such interest in this topic at the moment, I'd invite anybody who has any ideas how Jisc in the UK or how EUNIS Europe-wide might be able to help and facilitate this. Whether it's we have run one joint event on assessment before, whether it's physical events, whether it's some more webinars like this, whether it's just a space to exchange ideas and share practice. Delighted if you could post any of those kinds of ideas into the text chat. I'll just remind people that the recording will be available. If you want to copy the chat, it's file, save and chat, and the same if you want to take your own copy of the slides. Now, has somebody put their hand up to ask a question? Yeah. Merlin, would you like to ask a question? If you have a microphone, then if you press the talk button to speak. Okay, maybe somebody's just pressed the button by mistake, didn't want to actually ask a question. A reminder that at the end of these slides there are links to, we've already pasted the links to the SURF resources that Annette's talked about. There's a lot more information that Jisc has provided, both HE focused and further education and college focused as well. And there are also ways to join in this conversation via the Jisc mail list and via the EUNIS Learning and Teaching group, in which case please just get in touch with me and email your details to say that you're interested. I'm just going to try and scroll back through the chat to see if there are any particular questions that anybody would like answered while we still have our presenters online. No, I can't see any other questions unless anybody's still typing. Seems to be a lot of people suggesting that some more webinars would be good and some more case studies would be good. If there aren't any particular questions, then I just like to thank you all very much for attending. Thank you particularly to the presenters, but thank you to all of the participants as well who have contributed some really good stuff and some really good ideas into the chat. We'll contact you to let you know where you can find the recordings and further information, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to speak again on this topic shortly. Thank you.